Welcome, everyone, to World Gone Weird, where we try to make sense of, well, everything. It's a wild one out there today. Let's get to it.
Yeah, wild is an understatement. Seems like every day brings a new level of, what the heck is going on?
It's certainly a lot to process, but I'm always hopeful we can find some understanding, some kind of positive thread to pull through it all.
Oh, positivity? Buckle up, Otto, because this week's news is a clown car of disaster. Where do we even start? The plane crash? The Stampede? The Trump layoffs? It's like the universe is playing a cruel game of disaster bingo.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. I guess we could start with what seems like the most immediate tragedy, the plane crash. I mean, a passenger jet colliding with a military helicopter. It's just statistically improbable, isn't it? And it's also quite unusual to see a Black Hawk involved in a mid-air collision like this. You don't hear that very often.
Statistically improbable, maybe, but also, I gotta ask, what were they even doing? A training flight over a major metropolitan area near an airport? It seems like a recipe for disaster. And why was the Black Hawk in the same airspace as a commercial jet? Was there some sort of breakdown in air traffic control procedures? It just raises a ton of questions for me.
Absolutely, Jimmy. It's a terrible loss of life, that's clear, and the reports of the water temperature being so cold. I mean, even if they survived the initial impact, the cold shock, the hypothermia, the National Weather Service saying unconsciousness in under 30 minutes, it just compounds the tragedy. My heart goes out to the rescuers, too. They're dealing with extremely tough conditions.
Oh, yeah, tough conditions is putting it mildly. I bet those rescue divers are wishing they'd stayed home and watched some reality TV. Also, 35-degree water, that's basically a meat locker, and you're just bobbing around in it. What a nightmare scenario.
It highlights the harsh reality of the environment's impact on a situation like that. The fact that the Weather Service is having to point out what should be obvious, near freezing water being a physiological crisis, shows just how much environmental factors influence emergency outcomes. It's not just the accident itself, it's the immediate environmental conditions. It's also about having equipment and techniques that can handle these specific conditions. And I'm wondering how effective they actually are in reality. Are there any updated procedures since the Air Florida flight crash in 1982 with similar conditions?
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about the immediate response. It's about the procedures that led to that plane and helicopter being in the same airspace at the same time. I mean, what are the established protocols for military aircraft operating near civilian air corridors? Someone really needs to be digging deep into that, not just focusing on the search and rescue, which of course is important, but that's a symptom of something else. It's almost like we're focusing on the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, when we should be asking why people are falling off the cliff in the first place.
That's a great point. It's about prevention, not just reaction. And it seems like both of these major events have similar threads. The plane crash and the stampede at the Kumbh both speak to the fragility of large-scale systems and the importance of planning and risk mitigation. It's not enough to just react to a crisis. We have to actively prevent them.
Oh, the Kumbh, that's another beauty. I mean, seriously, 100 million people trying to take a bath in the same river on the same day. It sounds like a Monty Python sketch. Who thought that was a good idea? And now there's this stampede, and of course, there's several feared dead, which is never a good sign. It's always several, and then later you realize it's dozens, if not hundreds. It's like they don't want to scare us with the real numbers.
The scale of the Kumbh Mela is genuinely mind-boggling. I mean, they expect 400 million people total. That's like the population of a good-sized country. And the fact that it's a recurring issue, you see stampedes at these events quite frequently. It raises questions about the way these massive gatherings are planned and managed. I mean, shouldn't there be some kind of modeling to estimate crowd density, predict choke points, and create effective contingency plans? Surely there's a way to apply science to manage the sheer volume of people and therefore minimize these predictable disasters.
Right, you'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, 400 million people? That's an enormous undertaking. What's the long-term impact on infrastructure, resource consumption, and societal order? Are there any contingency plans in place, or is it just a free-for-all? It's chaos by design. And is anyone tracking the secondary effects of so many people in one place? Like, what's the environmental impact? The logistical implications? Where does the waste go?
Oh, I bet the local businesses are having a field day. Think of all the authentic trinkets they're selling, the overpriced chai. It's like a pop-up capitalist wet dream. But seriously though, all those people crammed together, fighting for a spot in the river. I mean, have these people not heard of a bathtub? Or maybe they just want a bit of a communal, slightly disgusting bath. I mean, some people think it's a good idea to share a communal bathtub.
It raises a larger point, doesn't it? The desire for these communal experiences is powerful, but the lack of planning for the sheer logistics of these events is shocking. It's a collision of deeply held beliefs and logistical oversight. And the stampede was apparently triggered by people trying to cross barricades, which points to an underlying lack of crowd management and inadequate planning for movement of this many people. It is almost like they expect this to occur.
Yeah, it's like they're relying on some form of divine intervention to keep things from collapsing instead of, actual planning and common sense. And this is where things get very frustrating for me. I mean, on one hand, you have millions of people gathering for a religious ceremony, and on the other, you have this plane crash in a major city, not to mention the US aid layoffs. All seemingly random, but also all pointing to deeper systemic problems. It's too much happening, all at the same time. What's the connective tissue?
The connective tissue might be that we're seeing a lot of systems pushed to their breaking point. The infrastructure wasn't able to support the massive influx of people, the emergency response wasn't as effective as it could have been, and those layoffs at USAID are a direct result of political upheaval impacting international aid programs. These events, while disparate, are all symptoms of a larger issue, a lack of foresight, planning, and a kind of basic empathy, perhaps.
Oh, empathy. That's a nice word, Otto. I prefer to call it a lack of common sense. Like when a government decides to just stop funding aid programs overnight. I mean, those 390 USAID contractors, what happens to them? They're just out of a job because someone decided that foreign aid doesn't align with American interests. Does anyone actually know what those interests are? Is it just me, or is there something else?
And it's such a clear example of decision-making that has a clear knock-on effect, right? That stop work order, it's not just impacting the people who lost their jobs, it's impacting the projects those people were working on. The USAID official we're hearing about here said that all departments, including offices dealing with hives/AIDS, infectious diseases, and child health, were affected. So what was the analysis? Was there a scientific cost-benefit analysis done to show stopping these projects wouldn't lead to more problems down the road?
Exactly. It's an oversimplified view of international relations and aid effectiveness. And it raises a lot of questions about whether these programs are even effective in the first place. I mean, are there measurable ways to ensure foreign aid is being used efficiently? Or is it just throwing money at the problem? And what about unintended consequences? Are we creating long-term dependency? Are we incentivizing bad actors to take advantage of our generosity? And why the sudden stop? What evidence is there to suggest that these programs are not working, or are in fact harmful to American interests?
But surely there must be projects that have genuinely helped people, and stopping those seems like such a short-sighted approach. It makes me wonder how we can ensure that essential international aid efforts can continue, and how we can counteract the potential negative impacts, especially in developing nations, where these projects can make a real difference, and what it's going to do to increase inequality. Is there any thought given to the damage this could do to global stability and collaboration?
Oh, I'm sure there's some good that's been done. I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day, isn't it? But it's a real mess. And isn't that what they want? The chaos, the confusion? It's like a badly written reality TV show, only the stakes are real lives, and no one gets a reunion episode. I mean, all these stop work orders and these pauses, it feels like this is a way to gain more control and power over a given institution. It's not about improvement, it's about control.
It certainly raises questions about the decision-making process. I mean, what specific criteria are being used to assess whether these projects align with American interests? It sounds incredibly subjective, almost deliberately so, and based on political whims rather than a clear understanding of project outcomes and the long-term impacts on both the receiving country and the US. It's the antithesis of evidence-based decision-making, isn't it? I mean, where's the data, the scientific rigor? Where's the actual research backing these decisions?
Precisely. It's all very subjective, and that opens the door for arbitrary decision-making. And where is the accountability? I mean, who's going to be held responsible for the fallout from these decisions? How does the administration plan to manage the chaos this will cause? What happens to the supply chains that are going to be disrupted? The knock-on effect will be huge, and they're just ignoring it. And the human cost is going to be high. And what are the alternatives? If these aid programs are being paused or stopped, is there any other organization stepping in to address these needs?
It does feel very arbitrary, yes, and it creates a lot of uncertainty, not only for the employees, but for the recipients of these aid programs. The programs themselves might be flawed, absolutely, but these massive, sweeping decisions, without any thought to the broader impact, just seems reckless. It's just so disheartening, And how can we, as global citizens, ensure that humanitarian efforts can continue even when political winds shift?
Oh, global citizens, you're adorable, Otto. It sounds like you're making a very important point, though, but I have to ask, is anyone actually in charge here? It's like we're on a runaway train and no one's at the controls. We're seeing plane crashes, stampedes, and now mass layoffs all at once, and it all feels connected somehow, almost like it's orchestrated. I mean, is this the new normal? Are we just going to bounce between disasters and political chaos until we all just start spontaneously combusting?
It certainly does feel chaotic, doesn't it? And I think that's a key point. The feeling of being overwhelmed, the sense that things are spiraling out of control. It's hard to see the connections, the root causes, and that itself is a source of stress and anxiety. And it's not just the events themselves, it's the way we process them. With the social media landscape, how quickly things spread and how quickly narratives are formed, we don't get a chance to evaluate the evidence logically.
Yeah, that's true, and this is where the social media angle comes in. I mean, all of this chaos is happening in a world where everyone has a platform to voice their opinion, often without any kind of fact-checking. And these algorithms push people further into their own little echo chambers, reinforcing their biases. So, instead of trying to understand the complexities of these situations, people gravitate towards the most extreme or sensationalized narratives. So you get these online cults of personality forming, where critical thinking goes out the window, and people are more likely to believe in wild conspiracy theories.
And it's so worrying, right? Because these online spaces can reinforce existing biases and create a distorted view of reality. The algorithms prioritize engagement, not truth, and that leads to this cycle of outrage and conflict. It's not about finding understanding or solutions, it's about generating emotional responses, and that's incredibly destructive to meaningful dialogue. And I worry about how easily people are manipulated into believing things that are simply not true, and what actions those beliefs might lead to. The potential for real-world consequences is clear.
Oh, the outrage. It's the main ingredient in the internet's special sauce. It's all look at this terrible thing, and you need to be angry about this. It's like we're all just puppets, dancing to the tune of whatever's trending. And we are all so quick to jump on the bandwagon and attack whoever is convenient, often missing the deeper issues or missing what's in front of our faces. I mean, this constant state of outrage, is that really helping us? I mean, does it actually accomplish anything?
And that's what's really concerning. These algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, which means they are designed to promote content that elicits a strong emotional response, regardless of the factual basis. And that's dangerous, right? It's a system designed to promote outrage and division, and that leads to this erosion of critical thinking. We see this in all sorts of areas, not just politics. We see it in debates about science, about health, even about basic human rights. So these social media platforms that were meant to connect us are actually creating these silos that push us apart.
Exactly. And those silos, those echo chambers, they create the perfect environment for online personality cults. People start worshiping these figures, these influencers or talking heads who often spout simplistic answers to complicated problems, and they'll believe anything they say without question. It's like we're seeing a mass abdication of critical thinking, and that's where it becomes really dangerous. These online personalities can have a huge influence on real-world behavior. They can incite hatred, promote violence, and frankly, just lead people to do very stupid things.
Yes, and that's the key point, the real-world impact of online trends. It's not just people arguing on the internet, it's the way those online narratives translate to actions in the real world. We're seeing this erosion of trust in institutions and in each other, fueled by these algorithms in the pursuit of virality. And it's incredibly difficult to navigate, How do we break free from these echo chambers? How do we promote critical thinking and empathy in a world that seems to be actively working against it?
Empathy again. I think it is adorable that you keep using the word empathy. It's like you still have hope. I'm over it. I'm not feeling empathetic. I'm feeling like we're trapped in a giant digital soap opera, and everyone's a character, and everyone's a character, and everyone's vying for attention, and the algorithms are just throwing fuel on the fire. So what happens when these online movements that start from ridiculous posts and arguments actually start impacting real people, like actually harming them? Is anyone going to do anything? Or are we all just going to sit here and watch it all burn?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's what connects all of these seemingly disparate events. It's the lack of critical thinking, the failure to understand complex systems, and a complete disregard for the long-term consequences of our actions. It's the algorithms that prioritize virality over truth, and that leads to an erosion of societal well-being. It's also the systems that lead to such massive logistical failures, from religious gatherings to government policies. It's a failure to plan, to consider the bigger picture, and to apply a scientific approach to complex challenges.
Yeah, it's a failure of systems and frankly, a failure of humanity. And it's amplified by this relentless pursuit of likes and shares and all of this online validation. People seem to care more about their online persona than actual reality. The desire for viral attention, for that fleeting moment of fame, is driving people to do incredibly dangerous and frankly dumb things. And this whole thing is feeding into these cults of personalities. It's this self-perpetuating cycle of misinformation and poor judgment.
It's a cycle of constant reactivity where we are all being pushed to be more sensational, more extreme to get noticed, right? and we've all experienced it at some point. And it's exhausting and deeply concerning. It makes me wonder how we can change the incentives. How do we design systems that prioritize critical thinking, empathy, and collaboration over outrage and division? And how can we, as individuals, push back against these forces that seem to be driving us all apart? I mean, is there any hope for a more rational and compassionate future?
Oh, hope? That's a funny word. I'm pretty sure hope is a setting on a washing machine, not a viable plan for saving the world. But seriously, though, you're right. We need to find a way out of this mess. But I'm not holding my breath. I feel like we're all just NPCs in someone else's twisted video game, and we're just watching as the game gets more and more absurd. I mean, who's even going to be left standing when the credits finally roll?
And I think that's the crux of it. We're all feeling a sense of helplessness, a sense that things are spiraling out of control. But maybe that's the first step to finding a solution, recognizing the scope of the problem. I mean, we see how interconnected everything is, how a plane crash in the US has threads that connect to a stampede in India to layoffs in Washington. These are all interconnected systems that are being pushed to their breaking points. We need to start asking the hard questions. Why did these things happen? What could have prevented them? And how do we create more resilient, more equitable, and more sustainable systems going forward? And that will take a commitment to critical thinking and a willingness to challenge the existing power structures. And we'll have to push back against the algorithms and the narratives that promote division and distrust. It's a huge task, but it's the only way we can avoid this slide into chaos. And to do it, we need science and logic.
I agree, and it's going to be an uphill battle. These systems are so ingrained, and there are powerful forces that benefit from keeping things exactly as they are. But it doesn't mean we should give up. We have to keep questioning, we have to keep pushing back, and we have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. And we need to focus on what's real, not just what's trending, and to be skeptical of everything. And maybe then we can start to climb out of this mess, one step at a time. I'm not holding my breath either, but I'm also not willing to just watch the world fall apart.
All right, well, I'm going to go find some funny memes about the end of the world. But seriously, I guess we all need to keep talking, keep thinking, and keep trying to make sense of the madness. Because if we don't, who will? Maybe that washing machine cycle does have a setting for hope. I guess we'll see. Either way, thanks for coming to my existential crisis, everyone.
Well, on that note, that's all the time we have for this week's World Gone Weird. Keep asking questions, everyone, and try not to get swept away by the chaos. Until next time.